is Andre Castaman. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning for a special ITFA online meeting for the Indian bank. There are three fintechs, as I said earlier, we want to focus on, and some indeed can be implemented right away without additional policy changes. So the first one we want to talk about is TradeStream, which is a member of ITFA since early 2019. And I will invite Jayan to tell us more about how TradeStream can help banks today. Jayan, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Andre. Can we, yeah. So it is good morning, all of you. And it is indeed a pleasure to meet many of you with whom we have worked together in this webinar. Some of you who don't know me, I am a chartered accountant by qualification, but I consider myself and take pride to be a banker. I have spent more than 25 years in the banking industry, including ICICI Bank, Yes Bank, and in TCS, wherein we were processing and putting in technology for some of the large global banks. Since the last 3 or 4 years, we got together, we as senior bankers, some of us got together on account of our frustration in the manual processing of trade and the lack of digitization and automation. And we also found the opportunity in the advances which were happening in the natural language processing arena as well as in the machine learning. That brought us into founding TradeStream, and I am currently in TradeStream working as the country head, wherein we have got the Center of Excellence as well as offices in Bombay and Calcutta. So that's a brief about me. Now for coming to the topic as in today, the world is indeed in a crisis. There is no denying the fact that the world is indeed in a crisis. It is very sad that we are seeing people losing their near and dear ones, and some of them dying without medical care, and some of them dying all alone in the hospitals. Having said that, while it is a crisis, it is also that we should not allow this crisis to go waste. There is always an opportunity which one sees in a crisis. The world trade is expected to go down. That is indeed anybody's guess. Likewise, the GDP is expected to go down. But I feel I'm an eternal optimist, and I would feel that there is an opportunity which is hidden in this downturn. I feel that there would be a new world which would differentiate in the way we live, commute, work, as well as consume. Trade finance being no exception, trade processing being no exception. It would not be the same, and if it remains the same, I think the banks and the corporates, etc., who would continue to process the way in which they are doing, they would have a tough task ahead. Andre, can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, I have been speaking to my banking friends as well as to my friends in the ports as well as the customs. What they tell me is in the ports and the customs, there have not been many issues as far as clearance of the goods are concerned. The goods are moving, the trade is down, but the goods are moving. There is also a movement of non-essential goods in India, even though there is a lockdown. But the banks and corporates have found it extremely difficult in two areas. Primarily, the movement of the documents, and the second is getting the skilled people to process these transactions. Even if the skilled people to process the transaction, the third difficulty which the banks have been facing today is how do they access their systems and platforms remotely. While the people are willing to work from home, since there is no public transport which is available, but the accessibility to their platforms and systems is indeed becoming difficult. These are the two primary issues which the banks have been facing in this current scenario. Having said that, the banks would somehow manage this process. The customers would also be more forgiving during this time. But having said that, I feel that the challenges would be post the lockdown. Trade would definitely be lower to begin with, but the margins and cost would be under intense pressure for the banks. The proportion of LC transaction which have been showing a diminishing trend in the earlier years with the current geopolitical situations which is there, I would feel that the LC transaction will now show an increase. One of the reasons also being that the people are not able to visit different countries in order to assess the buyer or the seller. And lastly, the higher level of compliance for trade amongst countries would be a norm. Again, because of geopolitical situations, and also because banks would now want to, or corporates would now want to depend upon more on the documentation and the information that is available rather than on physical checking of the goods or physical verification of the buyer or the seller. Can we go to the next slide, please? So post the COVID in the new world, what according to us, which are the banks which would thrive, and which are the banks which would have major challenges? We feel that the banks and corporates which are nimble-footed and which are not only able to process transactions but also to move documents seamlessly are the banks which the corporates or the customers would want to move to. They want to see that the documents are moved seamlessly in a secure and timely manner. The second is the banks which are able to process transactions under any eventuality. Customers would want that the banks should be able to process transactions 24/7 by 365. They would be unwilling to wait, and particularly with this scenario, they would definitely be looking at banks as partners who will be able to process transactions irrespective of what happens. The scenario wherein we used to build in our banks a BCP, a disaster recovery scenario, would now be a thing of the past, because customers would insist that the documents have to be processed irrespective of whatever is the situation. Third is banks that are able to optimize cost. All of us as bankers know the fees that most of the bankers charge is either very negligible or it is almost zero for the customers. The banks which are able to, the customers would now pressurize the banks for reduction in cost significantly post the COVID scenario. The banks which are able to optimize the cost are the banks which would be able to come up trumps in the post scenario. In such a situation, most of the banks would look at moving from a fixed cost to a variable cost scenario. That would give them the flexibility for having the price to be elastic depending upon the volume of transactions which they would have. A fixed price scenario makes the prices very, very inelastic for the banks, and thereby banks would want to move to a scenario wherein the pricing is very, very elastic, or it would depend upon the volume of transaction. And lastly, there would be very, very less tolerance for inaccuracies in the processing, for inaccuracies in the compliance. Even one compliance hit or some issues in the processing, because banks would be working on wafer thin margins, the customers would also be working on low ticket transactions. The tolerance which they would have for compliance related issues or for some money getting held up would be extremely low. So we feel that this is what would differentiate the successful banks with the not so successful banks. And as I said, we in TradeStream have been working since the last 3 to 4 years on a solution because of our frustration on manual processing and the lack of automation. We've been speaking to the banks during this COVID scenario, and it seems from their talks, it is not what we said. It seems to be the medicine which the solution that we were putting in seems to be the medicine which the doctor prescribed. We were working on 2 major initiatives. One is TradeShare, which is a platform for sharing of documents in a secured manner, and TradeServe, which is a platform for processing of the transactions for banks. So this seems to take care of both the major issues with the banks and corporates are facing during this COVID scenario. So I'll just give you a brief of what TradeServe and TradeShare is. TradeServe is basically a cloud-based platform. It uses machine learning and artificial intelligence in a very big manner in order to digitize and automate the entire trade processing. So the principle is, first we digitize those documents through OCR and machine learning to begin with. Then we run the rules based on it. That is, we automate the entire trade processing by running rules. which are again based on natural language processing as well as machine learning, which is there. The third is we run the compliance on those documents, again based on rules, etc. The compliance would be UCPTC guidelines, RBI guidelines, the bank's guidelines, the dual-use good guidelines, or even the vessel checks and container checks, which would be there. And the last is, it is how do we ensure that there is a push of the transaction being processed through graphic user interface, through the MIS data reporting and business analytics. So there is a lot of granular data which is available, which helps in business analytics and for the banks to get insights on their customers as well as on the customer's importer exporter. So that's basically TradeServe. And TradeShare is a platform which helps the banks and the corporates to share documents in a secured manner. There can be multiple parties to a trade transaction. We use distributed ledger technology for this purpose. Each party can provide inputs. There are status updates which happen, and the privileges can also be set. So if I may, for TradeShare, our principles, the three underlying principles on which we have put it is basically the trust. That is, it is based on trust that we identify the parties and we ensure that the parties are securely connected. Because it is secure through encryption, it is a non-repudiation of the contract or whatever are the transactions being done on this platform. And the third is transparency, wherein each party is able to view as to in what stage the transaction is, whether it is in the importer, exporter, the advising bank, or the negotiating bank. So these are the three principles on which TradeShare has been built in. So to begin with, if I may summarize, the TradeShare is one which a corporate would start off with, wherein it would start off with exchanging these documents between its bankers and its buyer or seller. TradeServe is a platform which the bank would start off with for processing transactions for themselves. However, this TradeShare can also be used by the corporates before they send the documents across to the bank. Some of the differentiators which we have, as I said, it is in the cloud 24/7, 365. One of the primary things is the data is stored in India. Amazon Web Server, on which we are currently based, it allows data to be stored in India. So some of the issues regarding data being taken out of India is taken care of. There are more than 275,000 rules in the platform. One thing which I would like to highlight, and which I am particularly proud of, is that up till now, with the banks and the corporates with whom we have worked out, there has not been a single case manual checker has found discrepancy and the system has not caught it. And the platform has found a discrepancy, but the manual checker has not been able to find, but not a single case vice versa. And quick implementation, it's less than a week. And we've got a team, we pride ourselves as being bankers in the technology industry. We've got a team of people who are veterans in the banking industry.
Thank you, Jayan.
Yeah.